My name is Julia Carter. I'm 29 years old and the CEO of a luxury interior design firm in Denver. I wasn't born into privilege, but I was given a second chance to live, to grow, and to become the woman my adoptive mother always believed I could be. Right during the reading of Eleanor Hartley's will, the woman who rescued me from abandonment, raised me with quiet love and strict guidance, the conference room door swung open. Standing there were two people I never thought I'd see again: Travis and Monique Bennett. My biological parents. The same ones who left me on the side of a road in Idaho when I was 14, with nothing but a bottle of water and the words, "Wait here, we'll be right back." I waited. All night. All month. All year. And now, after 15 years of silence, they were back. Not to apologize. Not to hold me. They came to claim a portion of the estate my adoptive mother left behind, something they never lifted a finger to build. They said, "We're her legal parents. This will needs to be reviewed." Have you ever been treated like a winning lottery ticket by your own family? If you've ever felt like family only shows up when there's something to gain, leave a comment below. Hit like if you believe real love is proven through action, not words. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear what happens next. Because what came after this was even harder to believe. I sat silently in the leather chair, surrounded by the warm amber light of Attorney Walter Green's office. A black and white portrait of Eleanor sat solemnly on the side table, beside the thick will document with my name clearly listed as the primary beneficiary. The air in the room was heavy, still yet tense. Before I could react, the thick wooden door creaked open. They walked in hand, looking exhausted but wearing forced smiles. Travis, the man who used to be my father, looked visibly older. His thinning gray hair and heavier frame didn't change the way he carried himself, like the world owed him something. Monique, the woman who once gave birth to me, wore a faded brown dress, her dark-dyed hair pulled tightly back. She stared at me like she was searching for traces of the child they left by the road 15 years ago. "Hi, Julia," she said softly like a breeze, but there was no warmth in it. I stared back, throat dry. Walter stood, polite but clearly on guard. "Please have a seat. May I ask in what capacity you're attending this meeting?" Travis sat down, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like he was appraising its value. "We're Julia's biological parents. And unless I'm mistaken, there are no official documents terminating our parental rights. So we have the right to review this will." I heard every word, but it took a moment for me to realize my hands were shaking with rage. "Review?" I echoed. "You left me on the side of a highway with a bottle of water and a lie. 15 years, no call, no letter. And now that Eleanor is gone, suddenly you remember I exist." Monique jumped in, eyes glistening. "You don't understand, things were bad back then. I had depression, your father was gambling and drowning in debt so badly you sold me off." I cut her off, my voice like ice. Walter gently rested a hand on my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. He turned to Travis. "I'm sorry, but Eleanor left behind a legally binding, notarized and court-verified will under Colorado law. The document clearly states, all assets including her shares in Hartley Company real estate holdings, investment accounts and personal property, are to be transferred to Ms. Julia Carter." Travis smirked. "She still bears the Bennett name. She's our daughter. And unless there's a legal adoption record, we retain guardianship. We just want to ensure she's not being taken advantage of." I looked him dead in the eye. "I'm 29. I don't need guardianship. And I certainly don't need the people who abandoned me pretending to protect me now." Monique sighed and tried to smile with the fake gentleness I remembered her using with neighbors when I was little. "You're still angry with us. I get it. But I want you to know, we've been following your life from afar. When we heard Eleanor passed, it broke my heart. I knew it was time to make things right." Walter checked his watch and spoke firmly. "If you have legal documentation showing parental rights weren't relinquished, we're happy to schedule a follow-up meeting with the heir's legal counsel present. But for today, this session is concluded." Travis stood, patting his wife's shoulder. "We'll be back. And Julia, you're our blood. That can't be changed." I said nothing. Just watched them leave the room like they were strangers. Walter handed me a glass of water, his voice steady and low. "Julia, I'm afraid this isn't over. Eleanor anticipated this. I'll need time to review the adoption files and prepare our next steps. I nodded, gripping the glass tightly. I'm not afraid of them. But I am afraid of that old feeling returning. That sense of being unwanted. Walter gave me a knowing look. Eleanor never left you unprepared. She's been planning for this day for a long time. I nodded again, my eyes drifting toward the large window, where snow had begun to fall softly over Denver. Felt like the world was freezing over again. But this time I had something to hold on to, not just an inheritance but a foundation, a legacy, and a reason to stay standing. Eleanor had taught me that. And I wouldn't let anyone erase it. I still remember that day like it was etched into my bones. A June afternoon. The Idaho sky stretched endless and blue, sunlight gentle but sharp enough to cast crisp shadows across the dirt. We were driving down an empty stretch of Highway 20, Mom in the front seat silent, Dad tapping his fingers to the beat of some radio song. I was in the back hugging a bag with a few clothes and my journal. They'd called it a spontaneous family trip. A chance to reconnect after months of tension. The word family still made my heart race with hope. I hadn't yet learned that not every promise from an adult should be trusted. The car stopped suddenly by the roadside. Dad turned around and said casually, "Sweetheart, we need to stop for gas. The station's just half a mile up. It's hot, so wait here in the shade. Here's a bottle of water. We'll be right back." I nodded, not suspecting a thing. I got out and stood near a rusty road sign, watching them drive away in a fading cloud of dust. Even as their car disappeared around the bend, I thought, they're just getting gas. They'll be back. But the sun sank and shadows lengthened, and the stillness of the desert began to crawl into my bones. I sat on a rock, arms around my knees, eyes fixed on where they vanished. 1 hour passed. Then 5. No car returned. No engine hum. No explanation. I stayed there until the only sounds were crickets and the wind whispering through dry brush. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I'd been too loud that morning, or maybe I forgot to make my bed. I combed through my memory, trying to find some reason to blame myself, because that was easier than accepting what couldn't be explained. By midnight, the cold crept under my thin sweatshirt. I stood, the water bottle almost empty, and started walking. I don't remember how far I went. Only that my sneakers tore at the toes before I reached a small gas station with a single flickering light above the staff door. An older man opened it when I knocked. I couldn't say anything except, "I'm lost." He gave me a warm cup of cocoa and called the police. What followed was a blur. They took me to a shelter in Boise, a weathered building nestled between leafless trees. I don't remember the first names of those who welcomed me, but I still remember the blue wool blanket they wrapped around me on that first night when I sobbed until I couldn't breathe. I never told anyone that my parents had abandoned me. I was afraid that if I said it out loud, they'd see me as a burden, as the kind of child no one wanted to keep. So I kept repeating the same line, "My mom and dad are out on an errand. They'll come back to get me." But no one came back. Not that day. Not the week after. Not ever. A few weeks later, a woman came to the center. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her silver blonde hair pinned neatly back. She walked into the room like it belonged to her, not arrogantly but with a calm, quiet command. I looked at her, then quickly dropped my eyes to the floor. She walked closer, gently placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "No comforting, no coddling. I'm Eleanor Hartley. I knew your grandmother. I'm here because you need an adult who doesn't disappear." I don't know why, but those words made me cry. The social worker standing next to her smiled and nodded. "Miss Hartley is willing to serve as a temporary guardian if you agree." I nodded silently. Not out of trust. I was simply too tired to keep hoping someone else might come. The day I left the center, I was allowed to take a small bag of belongings. I packed my journal, a crumpled note scribbled by my father, an empty plastic water bottle, and a new pair of shoes Eleanor had sent ahead. Black leather with thick, sturdy soles. "No one should have to walk barefoot on the freeway," she had written. The drive back to Denver took over 7 hours. Eleanor didn't ask me anything the whole way. Now and then she glanced at me through the rearview mirror and asked short questions. "Are you hungry?" or "Need a bathroom stop?" I didn't answer. But I remember she stopped the car 3 times. Each time, a small paper bag appeared on the seat beside me. Pastries, juice, tissues. As if she had prepared for 100 different outcomes, including silence. Eleanor's home was in a quiet, older neighborhood on the west side of Denver. Red brick walls, a wide front porch, clean gray shingles. I didn't know then how long she had been running Hartley Company, only that everything in the house was meticulously arranged down to the last detail. My room was on the second floor with a window looking out over the rose garden. On the desk sat a small alarm clock, a fountain pen, and a neat stack of blank paper, as if she believed I had something worth writing. Eleanor wasn't the emotional type, but she was present, every single day on the dot. Breakfast at 6:45, dinner at 7, piano practice after meals, reading before bed. She never asked if I was okay, but she always called the doctor when I coughed, always tucked extra cookies into my bag on test days. For a long time, I thought I was just another responsibility Eleanor had taken on. But when I turned 16, she invited me out for dinner. A fancy Italian restaurant, candles, white tablecloths. I sat in silence, unsure why I was there. Eleanor pulled out a thick envelope and slid it across the table. These are the official documents. The court has confirmed it. Starting today, I'm your legal guardian. If you agree, I'd like to begin the adoption process. I looked at her, really looked for the first time. Her eyes weren't cold like I had assumed. They simply looked forward, like someone who had spent too long dwelling on the past. You don't have to change your last name, she added. I don't need that to know you're mine. I didn't say anything, but I placed my hand on top of hers. And in that moment, I understood something. Family doesn't always share your blood. 13 years later, I sat in a lawyer's office watching my birth parents walk in with calculating eyes, and I knew I was no longer the child waiting by the roadside. I was Eleanor Hartley's daughter. Not by law, but because she had taught me how to live like someone who never gives up. Every morning at Eleanor's estate in suburban Denver began with a small bell hung at the main staircase. No one else really used that bell but Eleanor, and she never rang it loudly. Just a soft chime, enough to wake the house, signaling one thing. It was time to start the day, not a minute late. My bedroom was nearly 3 times the size of the last apartment I lived in with my birth parents. High ceilings, glass windows opening to a backyard garden full of lavender and wild daisies. On the wall, a large world map, and along the oak bookshelf, rows of titles on finance, art, philosophy, and classic literature. Eleanor didn't speak much, but she left her presence in every detail. Breakfast was always ready by 6:45. A long table draped in linen, a pot of hot coffee, sliced fruit, sometimes scrambled eggs or pastries prepared by her private chef. But I didn't always have time to enjoy it. Because if I came down even a minute late, all I got was a cold cup of tea and a calm reminder: the kitchen closes at 7. I used to think that was harsh, rigid, unloving. But over time I realized it was how Eleanor taught me discipline. Not with punishment but with consistency. She wasn't the type to place a hand on my shoulder and ask, "Are you okay?" But every time I came home late from school, there would be a clean coat hung neatly by the door or a warm water bottle waiting on my desk. Those small things over time became my new definition of care. Evenings after dinner, we didn't watch TV or play board games like other families. Eleanor would turn on a soft reading lamp in the study, lay out the Wall Street Journal, and hand me a question. Today the Nasdaq had a noticeable shift. What do you think caused it? I was only 16, still wrestling with the periodic table, but she had me reading market charts, analyzing company acquisitions, and explaining news stories in my own words. At first I was terrified. I used to hide the newspaper under my pillow to study it in secret before our evening sessions. But Eleanor never scolded me for getting answers wrong, as long as I didn't avoid the question. She would just raise an eyebrow, pour more tea, and say, "Good. Next time, consider the leadership changes. The market responds to people, not just numbers." That's how I grew up, like I was in a tailored executive program. Sometimes I wondered if I was still a teenager or just a miniature version of Eleanor. But there were small moments that told me she was more than that. One time, I failed a high-level math exam and came home with the results buried deep in my coat pocket. I threw the paper away in the outside trash bin. But the next morning, I found it neatly placed next to my orange juice, along with a business card that read, "Tutor, Saturdays and Sundays 10 a.m. No lecture. No disappointed looks. Just classic Eleanor. Identify the problem, provide a solution." That Saturday, I opened the door to find a senior from the University of Denver carrying a bag full of textbooks. Hartley told me you're someone who likes to teach herself but just needs the right support. So let's start by telling me what you already understand, not what you don't. 3 months later, I got an A-. When I turned 17, Eleanor began bringing me to company meetings. Hartley Company was a high-end furniture brand with locations across Colorado, Arizona, and Utah, over 200 employees and an in-house design team. I sat quietly in the corner taking notes. Eleanor always started meetings with the same sentence: "We don't sell chairs. We sell the feeling someone gets when they walk into a living room and feel elevated." She taught me to see products not just with my eyes, but through the psychology of the customer. She taught me the difference between a $400 expensive chair and a $400 worthwhile chair. One afternoon, as we left the office, Eleanor turned to me and asked, "What did you notice about the marketing team today?" I replied, "They're struggling with the winter campaign. They don't understand the target customer yet." She nodded gently. "Good. Next week you'll present a proposal." My eyes widened. Me. No one learns without trying. No one becomes someone without being willing to take responsibility. That week, I stayed up until almost 3 a.m. every night, putting together my very first 30-page presentation comparing consumer psychology between two income groups. Eleanor made no edits except for punctuation. She let me present it directly to 12 senior managers. The meeting ended in silence. Then, from the corner of the table, a round of applause broke the stillness. It was Eleanor, always strict and reserved, now standing and clapping steadily. "The new campaign will follow Julia's proposal." I don't remember how I walked out of that meeting. I just remember sitting in the car afterward and Eleanor didn't say a single word of praise. She simply handed me a bottle of water and turned on the radio. But when I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw her smiling. A faint, rare, and genuine smile. I don't know when I stopped calling her my guardian and started thinking of her as Mom. Maybe it was when she waited for me in the rain after I was late to my first meeting. Maybe it was when she spent the night in the hospital hallway when I had a high fever. Or maybe it was when I looked back and realized, from the moment I stepped into her home, there had never been a single day she wasn't there for me. I didn't grow up surrounded by warm affection. But I came of age through consistency, high expectations, and quiet sacrifice. Eleanor didn't teach me how to love with words. She taught me how to love through presence, through action, and by never walking away. That was something I had never had before. And that's exactly why, when my biological parents came back, suddenly, like an old shadow rising from the bottom of a lake, I fully understood the value of the years Eleanor had poured into me in silence. No one could take that away. No one had the right to tarnish it with greed or blood. Because I had been left behind. And Eleanor was the only one who came back for me and never left. I still remember that first morning after graduating from Stanford, standing in front of the dark wooden door of Hartley Company's headquarters in downtown Denver, clutching a leather folder, my heart pounding like it was my first day of elementary school. I had returned to the place that had been the greatest classroom of my life. No longer the quiet girl at the end of the conference table, but now the newly appointed head of marketing chosen personally by Eleanor. "From now on, every campaign, every brand message will go through your hands," she said in the board meeting, her voice clear and firm. "Not because you're related to me, but because you're better than anyone I've ever trained." I only gave a slight nod, but inside a strange feeling surged. Not pride, but a sense of being seen, truly trusted with real responsibility. The early days in my new position were anything but easy. Reporting to me were mid-level managers who had been with the company for 10, even 20 years, and some looked at me with skepticism. Some called me Eleanor's girl behind my back. Some didn't hesitate to challenge me directly in meetings. Is this idea based on market research or just personal inspiration? I didn't respond with confrontation. I answered with data, with results, with revenue figures after each campaign. The first fall campaign I led, Spaces That Keep Memories, boosted online sales by 18% in just one quarter. Eleanor didn't praise me. But that day she quietly placed a leather notebook on my desk, its cover embossed with the words, "When you tell the right story, people will buy the memory." I've kept that notebook ever since. By the time I was 27, I was sitting across from Eleanor in her office. On the table was the annual report I had just completed. She flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. Then suddenly she closed the folder, leaned back in her chair, and looked at me for a long time. I'm stepping down, she said. I thought she was joking. Stepping down from what? Work. Corporate life. Endless meetings. Late-night business strategies. I don't have much time left, Julia. My heart dropped. What do you mean? The doctors confirmed it. My lungs are no longer responding to treatment. I might have a year left, maybe just a few months. I didn't want to hide this from you. And I especially don't want to leave behind a company you're not ready to lead. I didn't know what to say. I had never seen Eleanor look weak, not physically but in her eyes and voice. A woman like her, always in control, shaping everything around her, now speaking of her own death as if it were just another project deadline. You'll take over as CEO, she continued. I've already arranged it with the board. We'll make it official next quarter. I still couldn't speak. I just clenched my hands under the table, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked, Are you scared? Eleanor looked out the window. No. I just regret that I won't get to see you at 40. I want to know what kind of woman you'll become once you're fully grown. The months that followed were filled with everything unspoken. No one mentioned her illness, but it was in every detail. Shorter meetings. Quieter dinners. She coughed more often, but always made sure to leave the office on time so I wouldn't worry. Then one early spring day, just as I was stepping out of a meeting with the finance department, I got a call from her private doctor. Eleanor wants you home right away. I drove like the wind through familiar streets to the house that had been my home for half my life. Upstairs, in her bedroom, Eleanor lay in her antique iron bed, a light scarf across her shoulders. Her face was thinner, but her eyes were still clear. I sat beside her and held her hand. She gently squeezed mine, just enough to let me know she was still present. Julia, she said slowly, love is action, not words. I didn't respond. I just lowered my head and pressed my forehead to her hand, unable to stop the tears. Eleanor Hartley passed away the next day in her sleep in that very room. No final words, no dramatic scenes. Just like the way she lived, quiet, resolute, and always on time. 3 weeks later, I received the official notice from her attorney, Walter Green. I was the sole heir to all of Eleanor's personal assets and company shares, from the estate in Denver to the Hartley Company branches across 3 states, plus her investment accounts, design copyrights, and even her personal library filled with books marked with her handwritten notes. Along with that notice was a sealed envelope, red wax pressed closed. On the front, in familiar slanted handwriting. For Julia. Open when you're ready. I didn't open the letter that day. I kept it in my desk drawer, right beside the leather notebook she once gave me. Maybe I needed more time to accept that from now on I would have to move forward alone. But deep inside, I've always known one thing. Eleanor didn't leave me a fortune. She left me a life I could command on my own. A future no one could take, not even those who once abandoned me. I thought I was ready for any hardship after Eleanor's death. I was used to loss, to betrayal by family, to silence in place of affection. But nothing prepared me for the moment I saw my birth parents walk into that morning's boardroom, just as Walter Green was about to formally read the will from my mother, Eleanor. Travis wore a buttoned-up shirt and a dark blue tie, holding a fedora like he was going to church. Monique had on a beige trench coat, her hair pulled tightly back, her face so carefully made up that I barely recognized the woman who once stood in a tiny kitchen in our basement apartment. They walked in like they belonged there, like we were the ones needing to explain ourselves. Walter stood up slowly, polite but clearly cautious. Good afternoon. I'm Walter Green, personal attorney to Mrs. Eleanor Hartley. May I ask in what capacity you're here today? Travis offered a smile I couldn't quite place, somewhere between polite and manipulative. I'm Travis Bennett and this is my wife, Monique. We're Julia's biological parents. I sat frozen. My chest tightened, not out of fear, but because it felt like my past had come crashing back like a freezing wave, sweeping away the fragile peace I'd only just begun to build. They didn't offer condolences. They didn't speak Eleanor's name. All they emphasized was one single fact. They were the people who gave birth to me. Walter raised an eyebrow slightly but kept his tone composed. Understood. However, today's meeting is being held pursuant to a legally certified will, validated under Colorado state law. If you have any legal documents asserting guardianship rights still in effect, please present them after the reading of the will. Monique spoke next. Her voice was so gentle it gave me chills. We didn't come to cause any problems. We just want to make sure our daughter isn't placed in legal situations without family consent. I looked at her. My eyes no longer searched for connection or answers. I only wondered, how many times had they imagined this scene? Did they rehearse how to walk in, how to speak, how to fake concern? Walter nodded slowly. Let's begin. He opened the folder in front of him and began to read the will, each clause deliberate and measured. Every word he spoke felt like a clean slice, severing whatever hopes they had brought into the room. All personal assets, real estate, business shares, investment accounts, design copyrights, and all intellectual property rights under the Hartley Company brand shall be transferred in full to Miss Julia Bennett, currently using the legal name Julia Carter. I heard Travis suck in a sharp breath. He glanced at me, then turned to Walter. Excuse me, so everything goes to her? The way he said her made my skin crawl. Walter closed the folder with a soft thud. His voice was firm. Correct. There are no additional provisions for other family members, aside from charitable donations and modest bonuses to long-serving staff. The air in the room turned thick. I stayed still, my hands cold. Monique turned toward me, gently placing her hand over mine as if everything between us was just a misunderstanding. Julia, I know you're still angry, but you have to admit this is a huge responsibility. You shouldn't carry it alone. I pulled my hand away. Walter said nothing. He glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. Did I want to speak? I remained silent. I knew this wasn't the moment to let emotions speak louder than truth. Travis changed his tone, now sounding more formal, almost authoritative. Legally speaking, Eleanor had no right to transfer all assets without our consent. We never signed any papers relinquishing our parental rights. If our daughter was adopted improperly, then this entire inheritance could be considered invalid. Walter nodded calmly. I understand your concerns. However, Julia's adoption was completed according to legal procedure. Still, to ensure transparency and avoid conflict, I propose we temporarily suspend the asset transfer and schedule a separate session to review the documentation. Travis nodded, clearly feeling like he'd won a small victory. We're happy to cooperate, he said. We're staying at the Westmont Hotel. We're also open to meeting privately with Julia if she's willing. After all, it's been 15 years. I lifted my eyes and looked straight into his. You knew where I was for the past 15 years. So why didn't you come before my mother died? No one answered. Walter stood up quickly, politely bringing the meeting to a close. I'll be in contact by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, any questions should be submitted in writing. We'll review all claims that are legally valid. As the two of them left the room, I remained seated. The space slowly emptied out. Only the sound of Walter gathering the documents filled the quiet. Julia, he said softly, not looking at me. Eleanor anticipated this. And she didn't leave anything unprepared. I nodded, eyes fixed on the empty chairs they had just left behind. I didn't say a word, but I understood. The game they had planned, Eleanor had known all along. And she had stayed one step ahead, just like always. That night, after the will reading had been paused, I drove home in silence. Denver at dusk was cloaked in soft purple streaks stretching over old rooftops. The streets were quiet, but my mind had never been louder. Walter's words repeated in my head. Eleanor anticipated this. I took a hot shower, changed into the high-neck sweater Eleanor had bought me during a business trip to Portland, and stepped into her study, a room I hadn't dared enter since the day she passed. Everything was still as she left it. A faint scent of aged oak and lavender lingered in the air. I sat in the velvet-upholstered chair next to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a neatly bound stack of folders, tied with a pale ribbon. On the corner of the desk lay a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with smooth, steady pen strokes. But what made me pause was the hidden panel beneath the bookshelf. A small compartment I had seen Eleanor open only once many years ago. I knelt down, pressed my palm to the wood, and found a tiny latch beneath the hinge. A soft click and the panel opened. Inside was a small wall safe. The front had a digital keypad but also a mechanical keyhole beneath. I returned to the desk and opened the drawer I'd never been allowed to touch. A small ring of keys lay at the bottom, along with a handwritten note. If you've found this, it means you're ready. I inserted the key. The safe opened soundlessly, releasing a faint chill, like a sigh. I never imagined the truth of my life would fit into such a small space. The first document was a copy of a Denver County Court order, stamped in red and signed by a judge. Legal custody of minor Julia Bennett granted to Mrs. Eleanor Hartley. The date? July 16, 2011. My 16th birthday. My hands trembled as I flipped to the next page. A certificate confirming the custody process, reports from Child Services, Eleanor's statement, and a signed letter from Travis and Monique, relinquishing parental rights. I froze. I turned it over. It was their handwriting. The same scribbled lines I remembered from my childhood notes taped to the fridge. Mom's at the store. Reheat your dinner. Or, Dad home late. Don't open the door. Tucked just behind that was a thick bundle of printed emails, all with similar subject lines. Financial discussion concerning Julia. The contents made my stomach drop. In a letter dated September 4, 2013, Travis wrote, "If you don't want Julia's custody case reopened, I think a one-time payment of $75,000 is fair." Another, from December 2016, "Monique is seriously ill. If Julia's really your daughter, you won't let her biological mother die in poverty. Send money or I'll go to the press." The last letter wasn't an email. It was handwritten in blue ink on thin stationery, dated January 2nd of last year. "We'll stay silent if you're cooperative. Julia's grown up. Sooner or later she'll want to know who gave birth to her." Eleanor didn't leave any notes on the sides of those letters, but the way the pages were folded so precisely, how they were categorized and stored, showed me she hadn't overlooked a single detail. I kept turning pages and came across another folder, thicker, with a red mark on the corner. Private investigation materials. It was a detailed report from a private detective agency in Chicago. They had tracked Travis Bennett for almost 2 years, from 2017 to 2019. Notes revealed he had approached at least 2 other wealthy families in Texas and California, claiming to be a distant relative of children those families had adopted. An audio recording was included, along with an authenticated transcript. In it, Travis suggested sharing a portion of the inheritance assets to avoid legal issues in case someone questioned the guardianship history. I stopped, closed my eyes, and struggled to breathe. It wasn't just me. I wasn't special. I was just another link in a long chain of manipulation, crafted by 2 people I once prayed would come back for me. But they didn't come back for me. They came back when there was money. I sat still in the study for a long time. The soft yellow light from the ceiling lamp cast long shadows on the wooden floor. Outside, snow had started to fall. I could hear the wind slipping through the bare branches outside the window, just like the night I was left behind. I didn't cry. I just quietly gathered the files and placed them back into the safe as they were. Right before closing it, I spotted one more envelope at the bottom. There were no notes, just my name written in that familiar handwriting in fountain pen ink. Julia. I laid it on the desk, staring at it for a long while. Then slowly I opened it. Only one page. The first line read, "If you're reading this, then what I feared most has come to pass." I read each line slowly, as if I could hear Eleanor's voice echoing in the silence of the room. "I didn't tell you everything. Not because I wanted to keep it from you, but because I wanted you to have a chance to grow up without carrying the weight of hatred. But I also know this. There are some people who, unless stopped, will keep hurting others, including you. They didn't abandon you once. They have, and still are, trying to discard everything you've worked so hard to build. You don't need to retaliate, but you need to know the truth. Because the truth, even when painful, is the only thing that will keep you grounded when everything else starts to shake." At the bottom, she had written one more sentence, her handwriting shakier than usual. "True love is the kind of action that doesn't need to be seen, but still exists, like the lamp I left on in your room every night, even long after you'd already fallen asleep." I placed the page gently on the table, my hand resting over my sweater, right where I felt my heart beating. Not fast. Not slow. But deep. And I understood. From that moment on, I wouldn't keep going out of duty or gratitude. I would walk forward for myself, and for the one who stayed when everyone else turned away. That morning, Denver was covered in a soft layer of mist. Bare winter branches cast faint shadows against the glass walls of the conference room in Walter Green's law office. I arrived half an hour early, still wearing the charcoal wool coat Eleanor had picked for me last year, the cuffs a little worn now. Walter greeted me with a silent nod, his eyes asking if I was ready. I nodded. Travis and Monique walked in right on time. They weren't alone. Behind them came a tall, lean man in a perfectly tailored silver-gray suit, rimless glasses, hair neatly slicked back. He stepped forward and shook Walter's hand without a smile, his voice clipped. "Gerald Hoffman. I represent Mr. and Mrs. Bennett." Walter remained calm. "Thank you for being prompt. I believe we should begin." We sat down. I was on one side of the table. Travis and Monique sat across from me. Hoffman positioned himself between them, pen ready, documents laid out in order. Walter opened a thick folder, slid a few papers toward me, then turned to address the other side. "Before we address your objections," he began, "I'd like to clarify a few legal matters regarding my client, Miss Julia Carter." I sat upright, avoiding eye contact with Travis. I was afraid that if I looked I'd see something familiar, and falter. I couldn't afford that today. Walter pulled out a sheet of paper and held it up. "This is a certified copy of the Denver County Court decision from 2011, granting legal adoption of Julia Bennett by Mrs. Eleanor Hartley with verified signatures and official seal." He laid it down and continued, "Additionally, we have complete records of Mr. and Mrs. Bennett's relinquishment of parental rights. This includes original signed documents, confirmation letters from the Child Welfare Agency, and the court's review transcript." Travis raised his eyebrows, then let out a low chuckle. "Papers can be forged. We never signed anything." I saw Monique glance at him, a flash of tension in her eyes. But Hoffman interrupted before she could speak. "We're requesting a formal verification of all documents. My clients believe the entire process was done without their presence, without proper legal counsel, and possibly manipulated by a wealthy woman seeking custody of a minor through improper means." Walter didn't respond right away. He calmly opened a small silver hard drive beside his laptop, plugged it in and turned the screen toward them. "Then perhaps you'd like to hear this first." The screen lit up. An audio clip began to play. Eleanor's voice filled the room, slow, deliberate, and clear as though she were still sitting there with us. "If any individual, including biological relatives of Julia, attempts to contest the legality of this will, inheritance rights, or guardianship, all of my assets, real estate, equities, bank holdings, and intellectual property, will be immediately transferred to the Eleanor Hartley Foundation for Abandoned Youth, according to the addendum included with this will and notarized on June 8, 2022. Travis froze. Monique covered her mouth, clearly unaware of this clause. Hoffman furrowed his brow, trying to stay composed. "This appears to be a private audio recording. It could be inadmissible without verified provenance." Walter flipped open a thinner folder. "We have a notarized copy of the very clause, along with the original recording stored at Montgomery Field's notary office in Denver, confirmed by 2 independent witnesses." Hoffman turned to Travis, then slowly shook his head. "Under these conditions, any legal action could not only disqualify my clients from inheritance but potentially be viewed as an attempt to undermine a protected legal will." Travis slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. I'm her father. I have rights." I looked up and met his eyes. "You're just the man who brought me into the world," I said, my voice steady and firm. "You gave up the right to be a father 15 years ago, when you left me by the side of a deserted road with a single bottle of water and never came back." Monique's eyes welled with tears. "Honey, I wasn't well back then. We didn't know what else to do. But Eleanor would be better for you." I smiled softly without joy. "That's what you thought. But over the past 10 years, you sent her letter after letter asking for money. You threatened lawsuits. You negotiated. Was that also for my good?" Walter gently slid a printed folder toward the lawyer sitting across from him. "These are copies of emails, handwritten notes, financial threats, and payment demands from your client, spanning from 2013 to 2022. If necessary, we can provide audio recordings of 2 phone calls Mrs. Eleanor recorded in accordance with legal procedure." Hoffman flipped through a few pages. His expression shifted. He looked up slowly and said, I need a few moments alone with my client. Walter nodded. Of course. The three of them stepped out of the conference room. I remained seated, my hands clenched around a glass of cold water. Well done, Julia, Walter said gently. You held firm. I looked at him and nodded slowly. But I didn't feel any relief. Not because they backed off or lost, but because I realized, if Eleanor hadn't anticipated all this, I might have lost everything. When they returned, Hoffman spoke briefly. My client has decided not to pursue the matter further. Walter said only one thing, a wise decision. I looked at them one last time. Travis couldn't meet my gaze. Monique was still crying, but this time there were no tears. They turned away, leaving the room thick with silence, and a hollow space that should have been filled with truths from 15 years ago. But now I didn't need it. Because I had Eleanor. And she was the one who taught me how to stand my ground, even when facing those who were supposed to protect me. That morning I was sitting in Eleanor's small library, an oak-paneled room bathed in warm yellow light, where she used to read every afternoon, when the phone suddenly rang. The number wasn't in my contacts, but the area code was from Idaho. I hadn't heard from anyone there since Eleanor adopted me. For a moment my heart clenched as if some vague memory was trying to break through a door I'd long kept shut. I picked up. Are you Julia? Julia Bennett. The voice on the other end was weak but steady, slightly trembling. Yes. Who's calling, please? This is Sandra Knowles. Mrs. Knowles. I lived in the Whitewood cabin across the street from your parents' house back when you were in Nampa. I stood instinctively, my palm tightening around the phone. I remember. I used to call you the cat lady with the red tabby. She chuckled softly. That's right. You used to sneak my cat canned tuna from your mom's pantry. There was a pause between us. Then her tone shifted, grew more serious. I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I've been following the news about the legal case tied to the Hartley family. I know it must have been very hard for you, but I can't stay silent any longer. I sat down slowly, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I'm listening, Mrs. Sandra. I'm not sure if you remember, but there was a time when you were around 13, your parents were gone a lot. They said they were looking for jobs in another state. But one evening, I overheard a conversation in the garage between Travis and a man I didn't recognize. My window faced that side of your house, and that night I'd forgotten to turn off my porch light. The man said loudly, "We're willing to go with 30 grand if the girl's record is clean and she's healthy. My wife can't have children and we want it done before winter." My throat went dry. Every word she spoke pulled me back into that cold wooden house I once called home, where I used to shiver at night whenever my father stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, boots slamming against the floorboards. I can't be sure, she said softly, but I believe they were planning to sell you to a wealthy family in Texas. I wrote a letter to Child Protective Services, but no one responded. And then you disappeared. They told the neighborhood you'd been accepted into a boarding school in Oregon. I couldn't breathe. I sat there still holding the phone, but my mind went blank. As if my entire childhood had just been flipped upside down, not by beatings or harsh words, but by something far more brutal. The realization that I had never been a daughter to them. I was a transaction. Something to be priced, bargained over, and sold. Mrs. Sandra added gently, I'm not telling you this to cause more pain. But when I saw them on television speaking so kindly about parental love, it made me sick. If Eleanor hadn't stepped in, you might have ended up somewhere else with a different name. I asked, voice barely steady, why did you remember after all these years? She was quiet for a moment, then answered, soft but firm, because not everyone forgets a child who cried alone on the back porch every winter afternoon. Because sometimes, even without shared blood, the ache still feels like it's in your bones. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. They slid down my cheeks, dripping onto the worn cover of Eleanor's book that lay open beside me. I had no words left but to thank you. After hanging up, I sat still for a long time. What I felt wasn't anger like the day in court, nor the fear I had when opening Eleanor's safe. It was something quieter, deeper, like soil after a storm, torn open to reveal the rot underneath, thick and pungent, but also ready for renewal. I reached for Eleanor's old journal, the soft leather one whose pages had yellowed with time. On the first page she once wrote, "No one is born into love, but everyone deserves to choose where they belong." Underneath I wrote, "I've chosen. And I know, so did you." That day I called Walter. "I want to start a foundation in Eleanor's name. Not just to honor her, but to make sure no child is ever priced the way I nearly was." Walter said one thing I've never forgotten: "You don't owe Eleanor anything." But I think if she could hear this, she'd smile. I don't know if Eleanor would smile, but I know she would understand. Because she spent her life understanding children that no one else wanted, and quietly becoming the home they never had. It took me nearly 3 weeks to complete all the paperwork for the foundation. Although I was the legal heir to Eleanor's estate, I wanted everything done properly, transparently, not rushed, not showy. Eleanor Foundation for Youth Stability. That name came to me on a rainy night as I lay in her old room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the kids who've ever asked themselves, "Is there anyone out there who truly wants me?" I withdrew $2 million from my personal trust, part of the inheritance Eleanor left me. I didn't use a cent of her remaining assets for myself, even though I had every right to. The estate stayed intact. One part transformed into the foundation's operational hub, the other turned into transitional housing for teens without a safe place to stay. I hired a team of specialists, psychologists, legal advisors, social workers who had grown up in the system themselves. Most important among them was a 26-year-old woman named Valerie, who had lived on the streets for nearly 5 years after being abandoned by her parents in Montana. She now runs our transition program for young people aging out of foster care. At the foundation's launch event, I wore a simple black suit, no heavy makeup. Behind the podium was a black and white photo of Eleanor smiling, a warm yet resolute gaze. When the camera lights came on, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Good evening. My name is Julia Hartley. But before I carried that name, I was once a child without one, without a home, without a future. I was abandoned at a bus station at 9 years old. And I survived not because of luck, but because of the determination of a woman who saw me with a gaze my birth mother never gave me." The local news aired my speech in full that night. The next day our inbox was flooded. Messages came from middle-aged folks sharing stories about estranged cousins. Teens sent journal entries, photos, even asking to volunteer in any way possible. But what I didn't expect was the phone call from a journalist named Daniel Royce, who worked for the Idaho Morning Tribune. He spoke calmly over the phone. "We're currently investigating a series of child abandonment cases linked to a couple named Travis and Monique Caldwell. I thought you should know." I stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded, "I'm ready to cooperate." Less than a week later, a nearly 6,000-word article appeared on the front page. The bold headline read, "Child Trade in the American West: The Truth Behind a Couple Once Called Parents." In the article, Daniel presented evidence of at least 3 separate cases where Travis and Monique had temporarily fostered children in vulnerable circumstances, only to later abandon them at bus stations, parks, even public restrooms. One witness, a former staff member at a local church, recalled Monique handing off a 6-month-old infant to a stranger, so she could go on a 2-week vacation. The article sparked a major public outcry. The Idaho Police Department had to get involved. Federal child protection organizations contacted me, requesting documents and testimony. I handed over everything I had saved in Eleanor's safe: letters, emails, both pleading and threatening messages. Travis and Monique were summoned for investigation. I never wished for them to end up in prison. I never believed that would be the final destination for all this pain. But I also didn't think justice should be something easily forgotten, especially when it involves children. One afternoon in mid-October, I found a beige envelope neatly placed in front of my door with no return address. I immediately recognized the handwriting: slanted, rushed strokes with uneven spacing between letters. It was from Monique. I sat down on the porch bench, still holding the envelope in my hand. Inside was a handwritten letter, just 2 pages long. "Julia, I know I no longer have any right to ask anything of you. All these years I've lived in cowardice, choosing silence, choosing to turn away. No excuse could ever be enough for you to forgive me. But if you can read this letter through, please believe me, it's not to ask for money or for rescue. I just want to ask you one thing: to let go of me in your mind. Because ever since Eleanor came into your life, I've come to understand what real love looks like. And since then, I've also begun to see what I lost." I stopped reading there. On one side was the memory of betrayal, of being treated like a product for sale. On the other, a woman who once called me a burden, now writing an apology with no plea for redemption. I folded the letter and placed it in the desk drawer. I haven't written back. Not because I don't know what to say, but because I need time, not to forget but to fully understand everything I'm feeling. That evening, I returned to the room where Eleanor used to sit and read, where I had once received the call from Mrs. Kinder. Through the window, the streetlight spilled a soft glow onto the old wicker chair. I sat down carefully as if she were still watching over me from somewhere. I reached for the button on the coat I was wearing, Eleanor's old coat, the one I've kept with me since the day she passed. I whispered as if speaking to her. I haven't forgiven them yet, Mom. But I won't let hatred rot the love you planted. I will live the way you taught me, to never let the past dictate my entire future. And I believe in that silence she was smiling. One crisp morning in November, under a clear Idaho sky with the ground still kissed by light frost, I returned to the cemetery on the edge of town where Eleanor was buried. I brought a bouquet of white peonies and a small granite stone already engraved. I didn't go with anyone. I didn't need to. This was a private appointment between me and the woman who changed my life. Her headstone was clean, resting beneath the fiery red canopy of a maple tree. The original inscription, Eleanor Hartley 1947-2024, a resilient woman, had been newly joined by a softer, bolder line beneath it. Beloved Mother. I stood quietly for a long time. My fingers gently traced the cold surface of the stone, but my heart felt unusually warm. For years I had hated words like mother and father. They stirred up too much pain, betrayal, and things I never got to choose. But here in this quiet space I found the word mother more beautiful than ever. Not because of blood, not because of title, but because Eleanor deserved it more than anyone who had ever brought me into this world. I whispered like I was speaking directly to her. Mom, I'm done. Not an ending, but a beginning. I understand now. True family isn't something you're given. It's something you build. I'll live as you did, choosing to love the ones who stay even when the world turns away. I didn't cry. I've shed enough tears. What I felt now was peace and gratitude. I laid down the bouquet, gently touched the new inscription, then turned and walked away, each step steadier than the last. A few weeks later, I accepted an invitation to speak at a conference in Denver, hosted by a nonprofit organization for orphaned children. They invited me as the founder of the Eleanor Foundation, but also as someone who had once stepped out of abandonment to build a future with her own two hands. The conference hall that day was packed. On stage, the spotlight cast its warmth across the faces of people listening. I stood at the microphone. No cue cards, no slides. I brought only one photo with me. A picture of me and Eleanor sitting together in the backyard, two women, one old and one young, both smiling. I held the photo up and began. This is my mother. Not the woman who gave birth to me, but the one who taught me how to live, how to rise from the rubble, and how to believe that I deserve to be loved. I paused. In the audience, some bowed their heads, some blinked rapidly, some held their children's hands a little tighter. Family, I continued, is not defined by DNA. It's defined by who stays when the storm hits. Those who stay, those are the ones worthy of being called family. I told them about the first night Eleanor found me at the bus stop, the day she took me for a haircut, the first real dinner I ever had in a kitchen filled with laughter, and how she never once asked me, "Why were you abandoned?" but always asked, "What would you like for dinner today?" I didn't speak ill of Travis or Monique. I didn't have to. Because those who choose to walk away during the storm, sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. I ended with a message to the children sitting in the audience. You may not get to choose where you're born, but you can choose how you grow. Remember, you are not a problem. You are an unfinished story. And you have every right to write that story yourself. Applause filled the room. At first scattered, then swelling, then thunderous. I wasn't there to be celebrated. I stood there for those who had once been called invisible. As I stepped down from the stage, a little girl, maybe 10 years old, ran up and hugged me tightly. She didn't say anything. Just hugged. And I understood. Some things don't need words. They only need presence. That night, I returned to the hotel, opened my laptop, and logged into the Eleanor Foundation website. Hundreds of messages had poured in. But one made me pause longer than the rest. My name is Ava. I'm 16 and currently staying in a foster home in Kansas. I don't know why my mom left, but there's one thing I know for sure. I want to be like you. Not because of the money, but because I've never seen anyone stand on a stage and say that we're not anyone's mistake. Thank you for not staying silent. I replied to her message that same night. Not as an organization leader, but as someone who was once 16 who once asked, "Do I deserve to be alive?" during freezing nights with no one around. I wrote, "You're not alone. And you are not forgotten. If you need someone to listen, I'm here. I can't promise I'll fix everything, but I promise I won't walk away." I sent the message and closed my laptop. Outside the window, the city quietly sank into the night. But inside my heart, everything lit up. Not because of the applause from a speech or a new sponsorship contract, but because I knew that from now on, every step I took would no longer feel lonely. I had chosen my family, the ones who choose to stay. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong where you were born, if you've ever been called different just for daring to live honestly, then maybe you understand me too. Understand the journey of reclaiming your worth not through outside validation but from inner resolve. I believe each of us has the right to choose our own family. It may not be those who share our blood, but the ones who stand beside us when everything falls apart. The ones who see us, not for our success or beauty, but simply because we exist and we are worthy of love. What about you? After hearing this story, what do you think makes a real family? Is it blood, a shared last name, or the courage to stay when life gets hardest? I'd love to read your thoughts. Leave a comment below, because maybe your story could be the light someone else is searching for in the dark. And if stories like this touch something deep within you, about family, about choice, about compassion, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Because sometimes just one story at the right moment is enough to heal a wound that's been quietly aching for far too long. Thank you for listening. And thank you for staying until the very end.